The Marriage of Mercy. Sarah Chen's hands trembled as she counted the crumpled bills on her kitchen table for the third time. $47. That was all she had left until next Friday's paycheck, and her student loan payment was due tomorrow. The 26-year-old nurse pressed her palms against her eyes, fighting back tears. She had worked a double shift at Metropolitan General Hospital. Her feet ached, and she'd barely eaten all day because she was rationing groceries. This wasn't how she'd imagined her life would be after sacrificing everything to become a nurse. Outside her basement apartment window, rain drummed against the glass, matching the rhythm of her anxious heartbeat. Her phone buzzed with another overdue bill notification. Sarah silenced it and pulled her threadbare sweater tighter around her shoulders. The heating in her apartment barely worked, but she couldn't afford to complain to her landlord, not when she was already 2 weeks late on rent. She thought about her mother back in their small Ohio hometown, battling cancer without proper insurance. Every spare dollar Sarah could scrape together went toward her mother's treatments, but it was never enough. Nothing was ever enough. If this story touches your heart, please hit that like button. Share it with someone who needs hope today. And don't forget to subscribe to Billionaire in Love for more inspiring stories. Drop a comment below and let me know what you think will happen next. The next morning at the hospital, Sarah moved through her rounds like a ghost, exhaustion pulling at every muscle. She was assigned to the palliative care unit, where hope came to die quietly. Room 412 held her most challenging patient, Richard Morrison, a 62-year-old man with terminal pancreatic cancer. He had maybe 3 months left, according to Dr. Patterson. Richard had been at Metropolitan General for 6 weeks, and in that time, Sarah had watched him deteriorate from a man who could walk the halls to someone who could barely lift a glass of water. What struck Sarah most about Richard wasn't his illness. She'd seen dying patients before, but his profound loneliness. He never had visitors. No family came to sit by his bedside. No friends brought flowers or balloons. When Sarah asked him about it during one of their conversations, Richard had smiled sadly and said, "I buried my wife 5 years ago. We never had children. I spent my whole life working, and now there's nobody left who cares whether I live or die." Those words had broken something inside Sarah. She began spending her breaks in Richard's room, talking to him about everything and nothing. He told her about his late wife, Margaret, how they'd met at a hospital fundraiser 40 years ago. He spoke about his regrets, working too much, not traveling enough, not making time for the things that truly mattered. Sarah shared her own struggles, her mother's illness, her crushing debt, her fear that she'd never escape the cycle of poverty despite her education and hard work. One evening, as Sarah was preparing to leave after another exhausting shift, Richard asked her to stay a moment longer. His eyes, once sharp and intelligent, now held the cloudy distance of someone standing at death's door. "Sarah," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "I want to ask you something important. I know it will sound crazy, but please hear me out." Sarah sat in the chair beside his bed, her heart filling with dread. She'd grown fond of this lonely, dying man, and she knew his time was running short. "I'm going to die soon," Richard continued, "and I'll die alone, but I don't want to be alone at the end. I've been thinking about this for weeks now, and I have a proposition for you." He paused, gathering strength. "Marry me, Sarah." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. "Richard, let me finish," he interrupted gently. "I know you're struggling. I see how tired you are, the worry in your eyes. You mentioned your mother's medical bills. I can help with that. In exchange, I'm asking for companionship in my final days. Nothing romantic. I could never replace Margaret, and I'm not asking you to pretend, just to be there. Let me not die completely alone. When I pass, you'll inherit what I have. It's not much, but it should help you get back on your feet and take care of your mother." Sarah stared at him, torn between shock and a strange, desperate hope. It was insane. It was unethical. It was the answer to every prayer she'd whispered into the darkness of her apartment. But could she really marry a dying man for money? What kind of person did that make her? "I can't ask you to do that," she finally said, tears streaming down her face. "It's not right. You're not asking." "I'm offering," Richard replied. "Sarah, in these past weeks, you've shown me more kindness than I've experienced in years. You've sat with me when you were exhausted. You've listened to an old man's stories. You've treated me like I matter. Let me do this one good thing before I go. Let me help you the way you've helped me. That night, Sarah wrestled with the decision until dawn. She thought about her mother, whose cancer was spreading because they couldn't afford the better treatments. She thought about her own future, drowning in debt with no way out. Then she thought about Richard, dying alone in a hospital room, wanting nothing more than human connection in his final chapter. Was it really so wrong to give him that comfort? 3 days later, in a brief ceremony in the hospital chapel with 2 nurses as witnesses, Sarah Chen became Sarah Morrison. She wore her only dress, a simple navy blue one she'd owned since college. Richard wore hospital pajamas because he was too weak for anything else. There were no rings, no flowers, no reception. Just a dying man and a desperate woman making an impossible bargain, bound together by loneliness and necessity. The first challenge came immediately. As Richard's wife, Sarah needed to move into his home to maintain the appearance of a real marriage for legal purposes. When the hospital social worker gave her Richard's address, Sarah assumed it would be a modest house, maybe a small condo. She took a bus to the address, clutching her single suitcase containing all her worldly possessions. The bus stopped in front of a towering mansion in the city's most exclusive neighborhood. Sarah checked the address 3 times, certain there'd been a mistake. The iron gates, the manicured grounds, the 3-story house that looked like something from a movie. This couldn't be right. A housekeeper answered the intercom and welcomed Mrs. Morrison inside. Sarah walked through the marble foyer in a daze. Original paintings hung on the walls. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead. The furniture looked like it belonged in a museum. There must be some mistake, Sarah told the housekeeper, a kind-faced woman named Maria. My husband is Richard Morrison. He's a patient at Metropolitan General. He said he didn't have much. Maria smiled gently. Mr. Morrison is a very private man, Mrs. Morrison. He doesn't like to discuss his business affairs. But yes, this is your home now. Let me show you to your room. That evening, Richard's lawyer, James Whitmore, visited the hospital. He was a distinguished man in his 70s who regarded Sarah with barely concealed suspicion. Mrs. Morrison, he began, his tone formal and cold, I need to understand the nature of this marriage. Mr. Morrison has significant assets, and I have a fiduciary duty to protect his interests. Assets? Sarah felt the room spin. What are you talking about? Richard said he had some savings. Mr. Whitmore's eyebrow arched. He didn't tell you? Richard Morrison is the principal owner of Metropolitan General Hospital. He also owns controlling stakes in 7 other hospitals across the state, along with several medical supply companies and pharmaceutical investments. Your husband's net worth is approximately $3.2 billion. The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. She gripped the edge of Richard's bed to keep from falling. That's impossible. He's been here for weeks. Everyone treats him like a regular patient. Nobody said anything about because he insisted on it, Mr. Whitmore explained. Richard values his privacy. After his wife died, he checked himself into the hospital under minimal security, wanting to be treated like anyone else. He's been planning to transfer ownership of his assets before his death, and now apparently, he's chosen you as his beneficiary. I need to ensure this marriage is legitimate and that you haven't coerced a dying man. Sarah's face burned with shame and anger. I didn't know. I swear I had no idea who he was. He told me he had some money saved, enough to help with my mother's medical bills. I thought, maybe $100,000 at most. I didn't marry him for billions. I married him because he was alone and scared, and I couldn't bear the thought of him dying with nobody who cared. She turned to Richard, who'd been silent throughout the exchange. Why didn't you tell me? Richard's eyes filled with tears. Would you have married me if you'd known? Or would you have run away afraid I'd think you were a gold digger? I've had people pretend to care about me for my money my whole life, Sarah. But you cared when you thought I had nothing. That's why I knew you were the one person I could trust. The second challenge arrived in the form of Richard's estranged nephew, David Morrison. The 40-year-old businessman appeared at the mansion 3 days after the marriage, red-faced and furious. He'd been Richard's only living relative, and he'd expected to inherit everything. Now a stranger, a nurse half his age, had stolen his birthright. You're a con artist, David snarled at Sarah across the mansion's living room. You saw a dying old man and manipulated him. I'm going to contest this marriage and everything that comes with it. You won't see a penny of my uncle's money." Sarah stood her ground, though her knees shook. "Your uncle spent 6 weeks dying in a hospital, and you never visited him once. Where were you when he needed family? Where were you when he was scared and alone?" "I didn't know he was sick. He cut me off years ago because I made some business decisions he disagreed with. But I'm his blood. You're just some opportunistic nurse who saw a meal ticket." The legal battle began immediately. David filed papers contesting the marriage, claiming Richard lacked the mental capacity to consent. He hired private investigators to dig into Sarah's background, trying to find evidence of fraud. The media got wind of the story. Billionaire hospital owner marries young nurse on his deathbed, and reporters camped outside the mansion. Sarah couldn't go to work without being photographed and harassed with questions. The hospital put her on temporary leave to avoid conflicts of interest, which meant she lost her paycheck right when she needed it most for her mother's treatments. Through it all, Sarah maintained her commitment to Richard. She moved his hospital bed into the mansion's master suite, hired the best home care nurses, and spent every available moment by his side. She read to him from his favorite books. She played recordings of his wife Margaret's favorite music. She held his hand during the worst pain episodes and talked him through his fears about death. "Do you think there's anything after this?" Richard asked one night, his breathing labored. "I think love doesn't die," Sarah answered softly. "I think Margaret is waiting for you, and I think the kindness we show each other echoes into eternity. You've changed my life, Richard. You've given me hope when I had none. That matters. That survives." As Richard's condition worsened, David intensified his attacks. He gave interviews painting Sarah as a predator. He tried to get court orders to remove her from Richard's home. He even attempted to have Richard declared mentally incompetent, which would have invalidated the marriage and his updated will. The turning point came when Mr. Whitmore discovered something crucial. David had known about Richard's illness all along. He'd learned about the cancer diagnosis 8 weeks earlier, through a hospital administrator he'd bribed, but he'd stayed away deliberately, believing his uncle would die without changing his will. David had planned to inherit by default, and he only appeared after learning about the marriage. When this evidence was presented to the judge, along with testimony from Richard's doctors confirming he'd been completely lucid and capable of making his own decisions, David's case collapsed. But the victory felt hollow to Sarah. Richard was fading rapidly. He slept most of the time now, and when he woke, he was often confused about where he was or what year it was. Sarah knew they were down to days, perhaps hours. On a quiet Tuesday morning, Sarah sat beside Richard's bed, holding his hand and watching the sunrise through the window. Richard opened his eyes, and for a moment they were clear and focused. The sharpness returned one last time. "Sarah," he whispered. "I'm here," she said, leaning close. "Thank you for letting me matter. Thank you for seeing me. Just me. Not the money or the power or any of it. Just a scared old man who didn't want to die alone." A tear rolled down his weathered cheek. "Margaret would have liked you." "I wish I could have met her," Sarah said, crying freely now. "You did, in a way. You have her kindness, her compassion, her strength." Richard's breathing became shallower. "Promise me something. Use what I'm leaving you to help people. Don't let it corrupt you. Stay who you are. The woman who worked double shifts and went hungry so her mother could have medicine. That's real wealth, Sarah. That's what matters." "I promise," Sarah whispered. Richard smiled one last time and then closed his eyes. His hand went limp in hers. He passed away peacefully at 6:47 a.m. with Sarah beside him, exactly as he'd wanted. He didn't die alone. The aftermath was overwhelming. Sarah inherited everything: the hospitals, the investments, the mansion, the $3.2 billion empire. Overnight, she went from counting pennies to counting billions. The media frenzy intensified. Everyone wanted to know her story. David Morrison disappeared from public view, humiliated and legally bound from contesting the will further. But Sarah remembered her promise. She established the Margaret Morrison Foundation, dedicating $2 billion to providing free cancer treatment for uninsured patients. She increased wages for all nurses at Morrison-owned hospitals and created scholarship programs for healthcare workers from low-income backgrounds. She paid off her own student loans and then started a program to pay off loans for every nurse who'd graduated in the past 5 years from her nursing school. Her mother received the best cancer treatment available and went into remission. Sarah bought her a comfortable house near the best medical facilities and hired a full-time caregiver. But Sarah herself continued living simply, keeping a small apartment in addition to the mansion and occasionally picking up nursing shifts at Metropolitan General, not because she needed the money, but because she needed the connection to why she'd become a nurse in the first place. A year after Richard's death, Sarah stood in the hospital chapel where they'd been married, speaking to a room full of nursing students receiving Morrison Foundation scholarships. "I was where you are now," she told them, exhausted, broke, wondering if the sacrifice was worth it. "I married a dying man because I was desperate, and he was lonely, and we both needed something the other could give. What I didn't understand then was that I was already rich in compassion, in dedication, in the desire to help others, even when I could barely help myself. Richard didn't give me wealth. He revealed that I'd had it all along. He just added zeros to my bank account." She paused, looking at the young faces before her. "Every person you care for matters. Every hand you hold, every kindness you show, every moment you choose compassion over convenience, that's your real fortune. Money can buy medicine, but it can't buy the human connection that heals the soul. That's what I gave Richard in his final days, and that's what he gave me in return, the reminder that our shared humanity is the most valuable thing we possess." The students rose in applause, and Sarah felt Richard's presence somehow, imagining him and Margaret looking down, proud of the legacy they'd created together through an impossible marriage born of desperation and loneliness, but sustained by genuine care and unexpected grace. If this story moved you, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs inspiration today, and subscribe to Trillionaire in Love for more heartfelt stories about unexpected love and second chances. Comment below and tell me, what would you do with a second chance at life? Your thoughts and support mean everything to this channel, and I read every single comment. Thank you for being part of this community, where we celebrate the power of compassion, kindness, and the belief that our greatest wealth lies not in what we have, but in who we are and how we treat each other. See you in the next story.